Hello, how are you doing? I woke up this morning feeling a bit glum, and there's no particular reason for that. Some days you just wake up and feel a bit down. So I want to make a video today partly discussing these feelings and acknowledging this, because I know frequently in my videos I'm smiling and happy and chipper, and that's because I'm talking about books, and books make me happy, and partly I want to make a video discussing a pile of brand new books that I think sound really exciting and that I'm looking forward to reading, and just looking through these books cheers me up a lot. So I want to discuss all that, but also how these feelings can come on sometimes, and I know that they're gonna pass and it'll be fine, but yeah, just want to talk about it. So I'm looking forward to, after I finish doing my work today, going to the gym and doing some exercise, because I find that can help perk me up a bit as well, but also getting to some reading. I'm really looking forward to that. So these new books have just been published in September. A lot of them publishers have kindly sent me, and other ones I've gone out and bought myself, because that always cheers me up too. So the first book I want to talk about is Night Journey by Greg Johnson. This is a brand new novel, which is about a man who commits suicide. Now, I know it might not be the best idea to read a book about this subject matter when you're already feeling a bit down. Although personally, I find reading fiction that explores these serious and somewhat depressing subject matter can be oddly consoling, and so yeah, this sounds really interesting. So it begins with a man who commits suicide, and then it follows the aftermath of that, revolving between the perspectives of his wife and his son, who is just entering manhood, and his brother. So following these three different characters and them wrestling with a sense of grief, but also they're dealing with their own issues in their lives. And Greg Johnson is such an interesting writer. I've read a novel of his before and many of his short stories, and also he is the biographer of Joyce Carol Oates. So he wrote this wonderful biography called Invisible Writer that I'd really recommend. It's such a fascinating insight into Joyce Carol Oates' life, and Joyce Carol Oates gave an endorsement of this book where she says it is a timely and suspenseful novel about deceptions, romantic, familial, sexual, individual. Its journey is vertiginous, careening, and memorable. My work by Olga Ravn, or Olga Ravn, I'm never really sure how to pronounce this author's name. So this is translated by Sophia Hersey Smith and Jennifer Russell, and it's about a woman who has just become a new mother, and she and her family moved to Stockholm, and there she tries to establish her new life, but she gets lost in the sense of her identity as a new mother and going online, and it uses a blend of a number of different forms to tell this story. So there's fiction, but also it blends in essay and poetry and memoir. And I always think it's really interesting, books that are this kind of blend of different genres to tell a unique story. And I absolutely loved Olga Ravn's book, The Employees, which is a completely different subject matter and story, as kind of a dystopia type setting on spaceships in the future with robotic beings mixing with humans. And so this is set very much more in the real world, but such a fascinating writer. The Maniac by Benjamin Labatut. This is a book which is also a blend of kind of nonfiction and fiction, where it looks at the real lives of a number of historical figures, but then it kind of manipulates the past and their stories to tell this unique tale about like the intersection between science and real life practical applications for that, looking at issues like the atomic bomb and a number of different subject matters in science and mathematics. And Benjamin Labatut he really specializes in this form. I read his previous book, When We Cease to Understand the World, which I found so fascinating and compelling, how he takes the lives of these real historical figures and puts them into a context which almost feels like a thriller, or at least it's very exciting to read about their lives and their struggle to reconcile, their work with living their day-to-day lives. Confession by Martin Kohan, translated by Daniel Hahn. And this novel is about a woman who falls for a young man she sees passing, but she has a lot of conflicts about this because she's very pious. And this young man goes on to become a general in Argentina. So it's looking at the story of their relationship and her life, but I think the story travels backwards in time to look at the 20th century in Argentina, that history, but through this personal lens. The Old Haunts by Allan Radcliffe. This debut novel is about a gay couple who go on a trip to Scotland, and one of the pair, he's getting over the loss of his parents, and his boyfriend is an actor. This man goes on an acting job, and he's left on his own trying to reconcile these feelings of he's having about the loss of his parents and the state of his life now, and the questions surrounding like how honest he was with his parents about his life and his desires. The Seventh Son by Sebastian Faulks. This novel begins in the year 2030, so in the near future, and it's about a woman who agrees to be a surrogate for a couple who want to have a child, but who are unable to do so. But she only discovers later that this child she has become impregnated with is an experiment, and so it's looking at issues to do with medical science and developments and that, and the slightly scary or morally uncertain places that it could go to in the future, but also looking at the decline of the environment. And so it's a sort of semi-dystopian science fiction type sounding book. Now, I shamefully have never read anything by Sebastian Faulks. Even though when I first came to England, he's such a popular writer and a lot of people were talking about him and discussing him, but this sounds like really interesting subject matter. A Green Equinox by Elizabeth Mavor. This is a reprint by the wonderful Virago Press of a novel which was first published in the 70s, and it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 1973. It's been out of print for many years, and I'd first read about this book when I wrote an article for the Booker Prize website earlier this summer for Pride Month, recommending some LGBTQ plus books from the Booker Prize library. And this is one I was interested in, but it was out of print, and so I knew not many people would be able to get a copy of it. So it's so exciting to see it come into print again. So it's about a woman who's an antiquarian bookseller, and she starts an affair with a male art curator, but then when that affair tapers off, she develops a romantic interest in that man's wife, and so it's following that story. And I love how there's this beautiful, striking and suggestive new cover for this novel, and so I'm so keen to read this story for the first time. I also have a number of new collections of short stories or anthologies of short stories, and it's another great idea and thing that I like to do is start the day right after I wake up of reading a short story, if I don't have to immediately go to work, to sit down and read a short story to kind of bring me out of myself and my thoughts. So there's the collection called Every Drop is a Man's Nightmare by Kamalei Kakimoto, and this is a collection of stories about women who are a mixture of indigenous Hawaiians and of Japanese heritage, and looking at their contemporary lives, but also the influence of colonialism and the continuing influence of colonialism upon their lives. I found it so interesting reading Hanya Yanagihara's most recent novel, and how there's a long section in there about Hawaiian history and about the struggle for Hawaiian independence. And so I think these stories also explore some of these issues. I Meant It Once by Kate Doyle, and this is a collection of short stories about women on the cusp of adulthood, or are finding the transition between their young lives and their adult lives to be very difficult, and navigating that space caught between this nostalgia for the past and uncertain prospects for the future. The Poet and the Echo, and this is an anthology of short stories based off from a BBC radio series in which contemporary authors take a poem and then write a short story that's partly inspired by that poem. And this is based around W.B. Yeats' poem called The Man and the Echo. And so it's showing these older poems and how they still can have a contemporary relevance. And so there are writers like Jenny Fagan and Jessie Greengrass, who's a personal favorite writer of mine. And so it shows the poems at the very beginning of right before the short stories, and then goes on to show the short story that's based on that poem, which is such an interesting idea. Peach Pit. This is an anthology of short stories by a number of different writers, and each story focuses on a female character who either acts in a way that is really bad or very morally dubious, or in a way which is very unconventional or sort of breaks the norms of what is expected of them in society, which is such a great basis for an anthology. And it includes writers such as Lauren Groff and Disha Filia and Kei-Min Chain, who are writers that I've really enjoyed reading in the past. And so I'm really excited about exploring these kind of wicked tales. I also have a few books of nonfiction. So first there's the memoir called Pulling the Chariot of the Sun by Shane McCrae, which is a horrific and terrifying true story about the author's life. When he was a small child, he was kidnapped by his maternal grandparents, who were white supremacists, because he was born to a white mother and a black father, and his grandparents wanted to raise him and protect him from black culture and his black identity. And so he's telling this incredible and terrifying story. And this is an author who's written a number of poetry collections, but this is him giving his account of his very dramatic life. Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. So obviously this is a proof copy, and this is what the finished copy looks like. And so this book explores our kind of modern existence, especially in regards to our online lives, and how we have these kind of doubles of ourselves, and what this does to our sense of identity, but also our political views and ways of interacting in the world. And apparently this is Naomi Klein's most personal book, because she talks about her own experience in this and sense of sort of doubling of herself. So I've found Naomi Klein's books so powerful. Her book No Logo was so influential. She's such an interesting intellectual. And finally, there is a kind of travelogue about food, but also cultural study called National Dish by by Anya von Bremzen. And in this book, she travels to a number of different countries and explores how certain foods are associated with different cultures, and looking at the history of that, about the sort of separating the truth from the mythology around certain foods, and why they've developed such significance in particular cultures, which is such an interesting idea. But also I love reading about food, and so I think this sounds so fascinating. So those are all the new books that I want to look at. I'd love to know if you have read any of these books, if you would recommend them, or if you're interested in reading any of them now, or do you have some new books that you're really looking forward to reading to help like elevate your mood. Like I said, I'm feeling a bit happier already just looking through and discussing like all the possibilities of these books. It always really cheers me up. So looking forward to reading later on today after I get finished some work. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.